Hello, this is our storyboard presentation. I'm Anthony.
And I'm Caleb. So for the first act, God establishes his kingdom. We find this in Genesis 1 through 2. And the main characters are God, Adam and Eve, and the devil who appears in the form of a serpent. The key events are when God creates light. God tells Adam and Eve humanity's responsibility on earth, which is to rule over everything and take care of it. And the last key event that we put was that God rested. God valued the Sabbath and took a day to rest. Some of the major plot points are when God separates the light and the dark. The verse is, "And God said, let there be light in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark sacred times and days and years." God then made Adam, which is the first man. And our last plot point was when God instructed them to not eat from the tree of knowledge, because that's something that he was told them not to do. And there was no historical events yet.
Act 2 is the fall, and you can find it in Genesis 3 through 11. The characters that are most important are Adam and Eve, Noah, God, and the serpent. So some key events are Eve eating the apple and then Adam eating the apple, because this represents disobedience to God, therefore letting sin into the world. This is in Genesis 3, verses 12 through 14. You can see Cain killing Abel in Genesis 4:8, which is a representation of sin being in the world. And finally, God wipes the face of the earth of the human race, but leaves Noah on his ark. This is in Genesis 6:7 through 8. The major plot points are the disobedience to God, which is Genesis chapter 3, sin and evil entering the world in Genesis chapters 4 through 6, and God cleansing the world in Genesis chapters 7 through 9. And there are no biblical events. There are biblical events, but there are no historical events at this time.
For Act 3, the king chooses Israel. The characters are God, Abraham, Moses, and King David. Some of the key events are when God makes a covenant with Abraham to be with him and to bless him. Another one is when Moses leads the Israelites out of Egypt and into the promised land. That just shows when God was with them. And our last one, when David defeats Goliath and becomes King David. Some major plot points are when God looks to make things right and makes a covenant to be with the people and to guide them. Our second point is when God establishes Israel as a nation of chosen people, that he anoints these people and calls them special. And our last plot point is when Israel falls short of the covenant made by God. Israel falls short by starting to be selfish and worship other idols, which makes them fall short of the covenant that God made. Some historical events that happened at this time where the Egyptians started to use paper and ink, and horses began to be domesticated in Egypt.
In Act 4, the main characters of Act 4 is the redemption accomplished. The main characters are Jesus, the disciples, the Pharisees, and those healed by Jesus. The key events, the first one being John the Baptist baptizing Jesus. You can find this in Matthew 3:16, where it says, "This is my son whom I love. With him I am well pleased." This is where God, immediately after Jesus is baptized by John, God speaks to him. The second event is Jesus calling his first disciples in Matthew 4:18 through 21. Jesus says, "Follow me, and I will send you out to fish for people," which was the call of the disciples. Key event 3 is Jesus healing the bleeding woman, which is in Matthew 9:22. This is not the only healing he did, but it is one of them. And finally, Jesus dying on the cross. The major plot points of the redemption are Jesus gathering his disciples, Jesus ministering and his ministry throughout his life, and finally, him dying on the cross, Jesus dying on the cross, and humanity being saved, the redemption being accomplished. The historical events during this time are just in line with the biblical events. Jesus begins his ministry in AD 26. Tiberius succeeded to take down Caesar Augustus as Roman emperor in AD 14, and Jesus is crucified in AD 30.
For Act number 5, the spreading of the news of the king. and the mission of the church. We find this in Acts. The main characters are Paul, the Holy Spirit, Jesus' disciples, and the members of the early church. The first key event was the day of Pentecost. The second key event was Saul's conversion, and when he got a new name from God and he turned into Paul. Paul then goes to Rome, and Paul's imprisoned for spreading the news of the gospel. Some major plot points are when the Holy Spirit empowers the epistles to go out and build the church. The Gentiles are gathered around Jews in following Jesus, and the church expands to Rome. Some cool historical events are when Claudius becomes Roman emperor, and when the Romans begin to use soap.
In Acts 6, it's the redemption completed. You can find this in Revelations 1 through 21, and this is in the future. The main characters are God, John, the angels, and Jesus. This revelation, a key event is that this revelation was given by Christ to John in Revelations 1:1. Second event is God holding the scroll with the 7 seals. This is Revelation 5:1. The third key event is the war in heaven. This is Revelations 12:7. And finally, the last key event is a new heaven and new earth replacing the old heaven and earth in Revelations 21:1. Some major plot points is John addressing the churches at the first in the beginning of his letter. Second is the visions of revelation that he receives, and he also tells his church. And finally, it's Satan being destroyed forever by God and the world being created new. Revelation was written in 95 AC, but there are no historical events since Revelation has not come to pass. Thank you for watching our presentation, and thank you.
Thank you for listening.